started. So this talk is a little bit dry. I will try to make it not as dry as I can. But really, the charge this morning is really to talk about just the visual scoring rules for sleep testing. This is one of those things, the first time you hear it, it will just probably fly by you. And it only becomes real as you're looking at sleep studies, right? So I think, we argue back and forth whether to wait and give you this talk, till the fall, but this is one of the things you just have to hear over and over and read over and over again. And so at least, very least, hopefully this is going to be a reference for you to take a look at, as well as supplement with some of the other materials. So this is our Bible for interpreting sleep studies, the ASM manual for the scoring of sleep and associated events. Even though sleep has been around a long time, it hasn't been codified into this rule set up until fairly recently. There were statements and this and that, but it was never sort of brought together into one document. We're on version 2.6 apparently at this point in time. I think I'm mostly up to date with this, but there may be some minor discrepancies from 0.4 to 0.6. So forgive me if I have some inaccuracies here. That said, beyond the manual, which you should either have or have electronic access to, there are a number of resources and references that I list on this slide that I would encourage you, of course, a fellowship to try to take a peek at some of them. One I think we sent around, which is the third one, which is the old Brett Chapin and Kale's manual. This was the original G manual for scoring sleep stages and what normal sleep was like. And to me, it is still sort of the gold standard in terms of looking at recordings. The examples that in there are beautiful. Unfortunately, my copy, I think we're circulating is a scanned copy, so it's not as beautiful as we had in the original book, but it's still something worth looking at. And there's a number of atlases that are available that some of the faculty may or may not have, and there's some online resources as well. So first thing I just want to kind of get into is the basics of sleep staging. So at this point, for the fellows at least, I've opened up a sleep study. And we're talking about this last week. Sleep study, yes. Opened up one? Yeah. All right. Okay, good. All right. And we know Nicolette has been looking at it for a while. So good. So that's the most important thing. So, really when you're talking about sleep staging, there's three requirements in order to stage sleep. The first is that you have EEG. And we usually make sure that we have at minimum 3 electrodes, at least on one side of the head. We do on both sides, but really that's almost as a backup more than anything else. So it can have its utility for other purposes. There's EOG or electrooculographic eye movements, and there's EMG or surface shed electrode recordings. So it's really these 3 key sources of signals that are going to allow us to be able to stage whether somebody is awake or whether somebody's asleep and what specific stage of sleep that they're in. There are recommended filters and settings, and these come out of the manual in terms of how you should go ahead and set up sampling rates for each of the channels that we're collecting on a sleep study and how you should filter each of the channels. I won't go really all over them, but you can see, like for instance, EEG that you're going to set a frequency filter, low frequency filter at 0.3 hertz, and the high frequency filter at 35 hertz. This will hopefully. What's that?
Tuesday, they'll have 10:20.
Great. So you guys know more detail with respect to
Filter settings are which are Greek.
my only comment about filters, and we'll probably get into it in some talk again in the future about it, but the purpose of filters is wrong.
Signal that you want to look at stronger.
Yeah, so get rid of artifact, look at the signal of interest, a little bit more. So those are really the 2 key things. So So remember, it's okay sometimes to take off filters or change filters. These are recommendations in terms of how to collect and review, but at the end of the day, you have to understand why you're doing what you're doing. I have some of my differences, on the right-hand column, which may vary a little bit from what the Academy publishes within the manual. For instance, I think, EMG filtering probably on the high frequency, and it's not really needed most often. And so, you can just use a low frequency filter of 30 hertz and you get a much clearer signal than you would at the traditional 10 hertz. Once you start to go to 10 hertz, there's still respiratory artifact that can still kind of come through, and you're not kind of getting, muscle artifact that you're most interested in, if you will. And, for instance, airflow, for instance, they will say, go ahead and do a low frequency filter at 0.1 hertz. That I think I've got it wrong there on the airflow. Even with 0.1 hertz, you can affect the native airflow signal, and you can miss some signature shapes that can actually help you in identifying what's actually going on. So again, that's something we can say for another talk. So,
Or when you're sitting with someone, say, you think that filter setting is correct for airflow? You got to hit them hard. You got to hit them hard. Hit them hard. Is that right? Right?
don't take it for granted. Yeah. All right, so I won't dabble too much in this since you're going to get a whole talk of the 10-20-20 system here. But this is the layout in terms of how we go and place the electrodes. Obviously, the even number electrodes are on the right side of the head, whereas the odd numbers are on the left side. That said, once you have these electrodes, we look at the issue of frequency, in terms of when we're looking at the issue, right? And there's 4 bands of frequencies that we're typically talking about. These are good numbers to just keep in your head. So delta frequency is less than 4 hertz. Theta frequency, which is most of what we're looking for sleep, is 4 to 8 hertz. Alpha rhythm is going to be 8 to 13 hertz. And high frequency beta is going to be anywhere greater than 13 hertz. So I'm going to kind of go through some examples, some of the different EEG signatures. And so this is just an example of delta activity. So frequency would be less than 4 hertz. The amplitude, from peak to peak should be 75 hertz, or sorry, 75 microhertz. And we associate delta wave activity predominantly with stage 3 sleep. And when you see more than 20% of the epoch as having this slow wave activity, we're going to call it stage 3. This contrast is what we would call theta activity, which is this 4 to 8 hertz rhythm activity. This is a background activity that you can see in stage 1 and stage 2 sleep. You'll sort of hear the term low amplitude, mixed frequency. And in a sense, this is really involving this theta frequency most often. There's a couple of other signatures that you want to look for, particularly when we're thinking about stage 2 sleep. And this is the hallmarks of spindles and K complexes. So on the left-hand side, you see what a spindle looks like there at the bottom. And on the right-hand side, you see what a K complex looks like. But, typically, a spindle is going to be in the frequency of 11 to 16 hertz. Its duration is typically half a second to 1.5 seconds. And I think that's important to just keep in mind, because sometimes, especially in the beginning, if you're not used to looking at EEG, and even now I go back and forth between, am I looking at spindles or am I looking at an alpha rhythm, right? And part of the thing that really helps is that spindles are discrete. And so if you see sort of that discrete component, that might help you think more that it's a spindle. You can always measure the frequency, but that sort of discreteness should be helpful. It's a hallmark of stage 2. And it's going to see most predominantly in your central leads or central variations of EEG. Now, K complexes are a little bit different. K complexes are interesting from from a physiologic standpoint, because there can be sort of good K complexes and probably bad K complexes to some extent. You know, there's at least one theory that K complexes are almost a response to a stimuli, and the brain's attempt to sort of then preserve something. And sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not. So we can see K complexes is where stage 2 sleep persists, or K complexes where alpha rhythm suddenly happens afterwards, indicating a transitioning to lighter levels of sleep. But it's high amplitude. It should have a biphasic deflection, and it's going to be best seen in a vertex or frontal lead, essentially. I think one of the things is you may talk during the 10-20 talk is just, you know, our terms in terms of negative and positive. So you're the neurologist, right? Or who's our neurologist? We don't have a neurologist. You're our neurologist, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. So in the world of EEG, you know, negative deflection is up, right? You know, and so that always confused me as a pulmonologist. What's that?
Oh, that's
Yeah. There you go.
They're positive.
There you go. There you go. So, right, so this is negative. Even though it's upwards, it's really, in terms of voltage, it's a negative voltage. Whereas positive is downward. So you'll see it in stage 2. They should be at least a half a second to be truly called a K complex. And as I pointed out, you can see it stay off. All right, so the next frequency up is alpha. You can see a nice, pretty example there of what alpha rhythm is. You know, it's almost the first thing you should be looking for before you really look at a sleep study and dive into it, is, you know, looking at your biocalibrations and seeing if you see good alpha rhythm. Because whether you see good alpha rhythm or don't see good alpha rhythm is going to tell you how to score a lot of the sleep study. Because a lot of the scoring rhythm rules depend on the ability to see good alpha rhythm. And so it's best observed in the occipital leads. Okay, so that's where you want to focus on. You know, we know that with eye opening that this tends to suppress alpha activity. If you close your eyes, the alpha rhythm comes back out. It's part of our biocalibrations that you want to be looking at. And it's going to be seen predominantly with quiet wakefulness or drowsiness. You can see alpha rhythm in REMs, and so that can get confusing. You know, am I in REM? Am I in stage N1 sleep? Am I awake? Right? So that's something you have to be able to sort out based on other hallmarks. And you're going to see this often occurring when somebody arouses. So that's the EEG. So here's the eyes, and just sort of, you know, where do we place the eye electrode? So there's 2 configurations. We usually use the top configuration in most places, but the bottom one is an acceptable derivation. It just depends on what your purpose is. And so what you're doing basically in the top one is you're putting it 1 centimeter to laterally to the canvas, and in the case of the right eye, you're putting it up, and the left eye putting it down. And we'll go over why in just a second. In the bottom derivation, this is 1 centimeter lateral and then 1 centimeter down in both cases. And each derivation has its advantages, disadvantages. It really depends on what kinds of eye movements you're looking for. So why do we do this? So it's important to remember that eye movements are conjugate. And literally, you want to think about the eye as a diagram, okay? And you have a sensor in the back that has sort of a negative charge, and a sensor in the front of the eye, the sclera, that we might consider a positive charge. And really, just like the needle on a compass, what you're looking at is really sort of what happens with movements of the eye and where it goes relative to where the electrodes are placed. So, for example, right, and if I've got my electrodes placed as we would under standard configuration, and I have somebody look to the right, you know, what happens? You know, if you just look at the right eye, right, if they're looking right, you're looking towards the positive component there on the right eye, but for the left eye, it's going away from that electrode, so you get a negative deflection there. And so you get opposite deflections when you look right and when you look to the left. The same thing is going to happen when you're looking up and down with this configuration. You're going to see our deflections that are out of phase. Okay? And that's really what sort of tells us that we have the appropriate calibration of this configuration. If we looked at the other configuration, it would actually help you differentiate between vertical eye movements and horizontal eye movements. But we don't necessarily, we're not as interested in that typically. So some people do, but most places aren't. So when you have these eye electrodes, right, you can see different patterns. And so the top one is showing you what we would call slow rolling eye movement. So you can see this nice sinusoidal appearance that's occurring within the eyes. You can sometimes even see this extend up to the frontal electrode sometimes, just because they're in close proximity to the eye. So you may see it reflected within frontal lenses as well. And then of course we have rapid eye movements, which you can see during wakefulness in stage REM. They can sort of have different characteristics, if you will. You can sort of see rapid eye movements or with reading, for instance, as well as through the standard blinks that you might observe as well. So with respect to EMG monitoring, we typically at this point place 3 electrodes, one as a primary pair and the others are really just as backups in case something doesn't continue to work during the course of the night. So typically we'll put 1 electrode above the inferior aspect of the mandible by 1 centimeter. And then what we go ahead and do is we put 1 electrode on each side relative to the center of the mandible, 2 centimeters over and 2 centimeters down. So that helps you capture some of the submental component there as well. So submental EMG monitoring, why do we do it? It's primarily for the detection of REM sleep. And EMG activity during REM sleep should be equal to or lower than that during the non-REM sleep. So that's important. It doesn't have to be lower than any stage of non-REM sleep, but it has to be equivalent to the lowest EMG. So in other words, other stages of sleep that are not REM can also have equally low EMG tone. So this is a table I probably would refer you to, in the beginning as you're sort of looking at sleep stages, and it really just tries to group the findings that you're looking for between the EEG, the eyes, and the EMG for each level of sleep. So for instance, during wakefulness, you want to almost compartmentalize that into eyes open versus eyes closed. So when the eyes are open, look at the occipital. This is what you primarily want to do because you're looking for that alpha rhythm. You're going to see rapid eye movements. You may see reading eye movements. And you might even see some slow eye movements that are starting to tell you that you're transitioning into stage N1 sleep, but it's not quite there. EMG tone is going to tend to be high during wakefulness. As the eyes are closed, you're going to see that alpha rhythm sort of come out a little bit more, so you can look for that and correlate that with the video, for instance. As we get into stage 1 sleep, you're going to see what we call this low amplitude mixed frequency voltage, or LAMP. That's going to come through, and that's sort of your standard, hallmark for the presence of sleep. There should be less than 50% alpha activity to call this stage 1 sleep. You should start to see that theta activity coming out. There could be some other hallmarks like a vertex sharp wave that I didn't get into. You may also start to look for slow rolling eye movements, and the EMG tone should start to quiet down. When you don't have good alpha rhythm during your biocalibrations, what we do is we sort of change our rules a little bit, and we may need to look for other hallmarks like slow rolling eye movements to start to clue us in that stage 1 sleep is starting. Stage 2 sleep is going to be characterized by the theta activity, the K complexes, and the spindles. EMG tone should be low, lower than wakefulness. And as we get into stage 3 sleep, we're going to start to see slow wave activity exceeding the 20% threshold. We're going to want to start to focus on those frontal leads because that's where the slow wave activity is going to predominate. And you can look at the eyes to help you increase your confidence that you're seeing those slow wave activities. And finally, in REM takes maybe sometimes it's very obvious when you see it, other times it's more subtle. But clearly what you're looking for is that there's a sudden decrease in EMG tone. You start to see these rapid eye movements. But if you were just looking at the EEG, you would think maybe the patient or the individual is awake. So you really have to combine it with other things to be confident.
So,
that you're
yeah, quick question. Why do we particularly want to look at the occipital lead during stage wait when eyes open versus stage 3 looking at the frontal lead? Like, what's the reasoning behind that?
So just because, you know, my point would just be that it's just more because that's where we see the signatures that we're looking for. So you know, for occipital leads, that's where the alpha rhythm is best. You'll see it everywhere, but it's going to really come out in the occipital lead. That's where you want to sort of calibrate your eyes, essentially. Yeah, is that what you're saying? Yeah.
And the frontal
And
lead
in
is
3,
more.
frontally, that's where the slow wave activity is going to be best seen. You'll see it again all over, but that's really, you know, for scoring slow wave, that's where you want to look. That's where we look for the 75 micrometer deflections, because that's where they're going to be best observed compared to other leads.
So when you just start, those are the times when, okay, here's stage 3, I think it is, and then you want to confirm it, you want to make sure that's the channels that you kind of focus, like zero in on. With the montage that we set up here at UH, we have one of each. We have frontal, middle, and occipital, one each line. We don't have all 6 of them, but then just because of the space, and that's the reason why we want to make sure that all of them are present there, so you guys can see. And we can
They're there, but
yeah. Meaning that you can still hold them out, and then you should be really comfortable playing around with the montage like that without saving over our montages, which I don't think you guys have the right to. But anyway, so just so you know, those are the things where don't be afraid. Go play around with it. Like when I was a fellow, I wish I played around with it even more, so that I can mess up what I could mess up. but those are the important parts where I think just play around with the program here, Metro, VA. I don't think anybody minds. You know, just go at it. Play with the filters. Really know what different things look like.
So the other implications here is your brain doesn't fall asleep. Occipital lobe really doesn't. That's where you actually first fall asleep. Your occipital lobe really goes forward to the front. So that's why as you go to sleep, all of a sudden your eyes or your visual things start to go to sleep. So, and they're also lateralization too, which is asymmetry between the two. But
if we had high density EEG, we would really
yeah, so what you really give a sense of. And the other thing is you never get lost on when they're asleep. Go to when they really want to sleep and then go backwards. So really want to sleep.
I'm clinically sleep.
Do you think K complexes are kind of the precursor for slow wave?
They are in a sense a type of slow wave.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. You know, but they're probably the pathways that are, you know, for slow wave and things probably different. This part I don't know the science quite as well, but they're different.
Cortical networks are the things that produce them. K complex, and the one I showed you, even had one alpha. Not alpha, spindle, little spindle. So you see a K in the opposite spindle.
Yeah.
Just because it's such bouncy wave, you don't really get the clear cut spindle out. Now, who's been able to sleep?
Oh.
That's what that's where it comes from. It's a journey. It's a journey. All right. So when we're staging sleep, by convention, we score in 30-second epochs. But as Dr. Stroll was kind of hinting at here, or stating, is that this is arbitrary, right? This is convention. It's not that the brain just sort of, hey, I'm in stage 1 state, then I'm going to stay that way for 30 seconds. The brain is dynamic. It's changing all of the time. But for us to do sort of moment by, second by second, or even less, we all go crazy, right? Until there's sort of automated tools that help us to sort of figure out how to do that. And probably look at sleep in a different way than calling it stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. We drive our staff crazy, right? Because sleep staging is still predominantly done visually. You can do it with the AI to some extent, but it's still not quite as good as having a visual look at it and sort of tell. But the advantage of AI is it's probably reproducible because it's the same thing, doing the same thing over and over again. Whereas there could be differences between me and Dr. Stoll at the same time. All right, so big thing. So because we're looking at this in 30 seconds, right? Parts of a particular epoch, we show different aspects of sleep. And so to just make it simple and reproducible, the rule has always really been, it's the majority rules. Okay, so just remember that, majority rules. So for any given epoch, if you're looking at it, you want to say, this part of the epoch is whatever stage, this part of the epoch is another stage, and maybe there's even a third, stage within the same epoch. But the winner is the one that has the most of that particular 30-second page. Okay. So here's an example of something. So I have one of you guys. Rick, what do you think looking at this?
So this is definitely not alcohol use.
Describe.
Yeah. So eyes top, EEG middle, EMG bottom.
That allows you to think.
I'm seeing a lot of really rapid eye movements on the top.
I think
Out of
phase
phase,
out.
out of phase inflections.
Good.
Indicated of eye movements. Amplitude is quite sharp, so it tells me we probably need rectify the face of the eyes and.
We may need to try to speak louder when we're around so that the people over Zoom can kind of still pick it up.
Sure.
Thank you.
And then the EEGs, which leads are we looking at?
Good question.
Assume
Let's just say it's occipital. Yeah, I think it's occipital.
I do believe this is not alcohol, it doesn't define alcohol. So it looks like low amplitude, mixed frequency waves to me. In the first half, that little, this looks like a little spindle there for me, right? Sleep spindle. The chin tone is hard to interpret because there's no comparison.
So that's unfair, if you will, but take it for what it's worth. It's just, this is, I'm not going to try. Hopefully, I'm not trying to trick you. But let's say it's elevated.
Okay.
So what would you be thinking? So looking at this, and you had to sort of put your finger down. On what stage of sleep this is?
You said the chin tone is kind of elevated.
That's a question. Answer the question.
So what would you think? Like, I mean, it's okay to have more than one answer,
With
right? Because
eye
You're right, there's some
like
caveats.
this, it could be the REM or blinking of your eyes. So, but I do see sleep spindle. So I wouldn't call this a REM because in the sleep spindle appearance automatically knocks this out of the REM.
yeah, so it's kind of interesting,
Do
right?
you want to ask a colleague?
Yeah.
Confirmation from somebody?
I'll ask the most experienced.
No.
Going Hi, Kalina.
Right, so I'll take it right here. So I agree, like with the eye movement that they're rapid, right? They're not giving me that sinusoidal kind of like slow, Dr.
Yep.
Really cool about it for consistent. I don't know what she called it, but she's like, "Man, it's like sing song, it's like an orchestra, it's not giving me that." And when I look at the, I'm just, again, I would assume occipital leads too, because they kind of just, they like mimic each other in mind and other things. I don't know, when I first looked at it, I think, alpha, without counting. Of course, if I wanted to think theta, and I'm assuming this is adult, right? We're not even talking.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So we're not even talking.
I
about-
should,
don't even
I'm
have
gonna
to
leave
think
that to
that
Dr.
this is right.
Ibrahim to
That
educate
this is
on
different.
the academic
Okay.
aspect.
So if it
We're
was,
only talking adults.
if it was a child, I would want to count because at the end of the day, they don't always have alpha.
Yeah.
You would have to delineate between theta and alpha. You have to like count like for it to be theta 1 or 2 less, right? So when I first looked at it, I was thinking alpha, and then with the chin and the eye movement, I was thinking that they were like.
So your conclusion is?
Wait.
What do you think?
I
We
think.
got a tie break here.
No pressure. I think that it's not, I agree with her in the sense that the eye movements are quick. I know that with stage one, we have the slow eye movements. Two, I don't think we should be having rapid eye movements. Even though those do look like spindles, you don't see any K's there, which I think is this. Also the island stuff is kind of interesting. Is that artifact the like heart?
Yeah, very good. That looks suspiciously right.
PSG are probably better than PG's, sharp.
So I'd go for
Yeah, this is probably right. There's some caveats, as Rick was saying, that you would sort of need to sort of look at some different aspects, particularly with respect to the EMG toe. I know sort of this kind of makes you wonder if that might be a spindle. Like in theory, it's tall and,
Continues a little long.
You know?
because although there's a little valley between the two.
yeah. And I guess this is, I think, a common issue for our eyes when we're looking at things visually. As Ramat was saying, you probably want to sort of start to measure the count. If you could break it down, I could do that for you if you're unfortunate. But that would be a way to sort of get at the frequency. But visually, I think what's interesting, this is not as discrete as I think it might appear. It's discrete. It looks discrete because there seems to be periods of high amplitude that are discrete, but just before that, during this period here and this period here, it's just lower amplitude, but I would argue it's probably similar frequency. So one of the things with our eyes is when we're more drawn probably to some extent to amplitude changes than frequency changes. And so when we see amplitude changes, we suddenly start to say that, oh, this might be something else, for instance. And I think that's particularly true when you're trying to tell the difference between wake and stage and sleep. So that's something to sort of think about. I think like here, there's probably a little bit more sort of theta activity, but there's a lot of alpha activity. Yeah, try. And then the other thing that your eyes are going to need to do over time as you look more and more is to remember that an EEG signal is not one frequency. Okay. So an EEG signal is multiple frequencies. And so you almost want to think about, a surfer. A surfer is riding the wave, you got this nice big delta wave that might be coming along, but there's a lot of stuff going on the surface of the water, right? The water can be a little bit turbulent on top of that big delta wave, if you will. And so there's different frequencies that are kind of embedded within the EEG that we can actually deconstruct and decompose using some mathematical algorithms. So your eye starts to see those different frequencies and you start to concentrate on things.
little things happen. You sort of sit there and go, is this predominant? Or is this the real thing, right?
So just in terms of time, so till how, we have till 9:15?
Nobody's behind it.
Nobody's behind,
Yeah.
okay. So we'll see how far, I mean, we may not get through all of
Okay,
this.
we gotta get over to,
Yeah, okay, so you'll let me know when the cut. And I can go faster if you want, or you want to spend some time looking at these and talking them through. So,
break down.
yeah, okay.
Break down.
So how about, Vermont, how about you, we'll have you start this
Well,
one.
this isn't a nice one.
Yeah.
Are we going eyes again at the top?
There, yeah, standard configuration, eyes, PG.
No, that's respiratory.
Just.
Well, those eyes look like, that they look like an EKG. I really don't see much activity going on there. Sorry. Forgive me. Come on. So the majority of that, and these two they don't look similar, but the majority of that, if I count. Or I'm looking at N1. Because they look slower, the frequency there. Than output, but then again, I don't have. This
So
is output.
30 seconds, majority rules. What do you see in the EEG?
So what if, I don't see these. Okay, so I don't see spikes, I don't see spindles or
Okay.
K readings.
Okay,
So what I'm debating between is output and theta rate. And
Okay.
again, this is where I'm struggling with pieces.
yeah,
Who is your alpha, who is your theta, right?
yeah, adults.
So I've been kind of hazing myself here. I'm thinking theta, but
Okay.
again, I'm not. But that's probably it.
Okay. Thank you.
So we're out. And
All right.
again, no high roll.
So looking at EMG, does that help?
It's active.
Yeah, but is it, what is it compared to previous?
Compared to last, it's slower.
Okay,
It's
you
not-
can mean slow, you don't mean slow.
Slower, it's not as active.
You mean it's
Calm.
the
Calmer.
amplitude, the
Amplitude,
is
okay.
less,
It's less, yes.
right, is that phasic activity in it?
Is that, I'm sorry?
Phasic activity in it?
Yes.
So you can, you say what?
It's a verdict. That's what he's trying to get at.
Way in one, we saw you, heard you do that.
Oh,
Where did you put your dollar there?
N1?
What's that?
N1?
Okay, all right,
Keep going.
Sam,
It looks like in the first half, so there's more to them. Also, I'm seeing some sinusoidal wave of the high frequency waves. So I think at least the first half looks to me as more like
Sinusoidal frequency.
the alpha waves.
Where do you see? Oh, the
Is that what you mean, or you mean like?
Yeah, those ones, yes. The amplitude gets bigger.
Rapid, so. Are you talking about the slow? You're talking about the envelope here, like
Yeah,
this part?
yes.
Okay, interesting, okay.
I think that's what I,
Yeah, we're trying to figure out what you're seeing. So
Right.
we're trying to get you to.
isn't that what
be
alpha wave
explicit.
looks like? It has those kind of,
Well, it's not the sinusoidal, it's really the frequency. So the frequency that you're looking for is that 8 hertz, right?
yes.
So, you know, I can't tell you that without giving you a ruler, right,
Yeah.
to go ahead and measure, but do you see that kind of going straight through the EEG, that nice, pretty little rapid rhythmic?
It looks
Pattern.
like in the later half that kind of frequency slows down.
Is it the frequency or the amplitude?
I think both.
It may, you know, I would say probably when you get to here, yeah,
That part,
Right.
that the frequency goes down,
you know, but here, otherwise, it looks like this stuff is going throughout,
right?
right?
And
The
I think-
amplitude might get smaller, like I was saying, right?
Yeah.
But the frequency is mostly there throughout until that point. we just
Yeah.
talked about.
So stageless is awake.
Because majority rules.
Majority rules more than 50%.
All right. So no,
That's
William used
Let's see. It does look like there are some eye movements that go on at the very end of it, which may represent some slow eye movements. And there is a difference between again, in terms of the amount of chin tone, there is decrease. It looks about the same frequency in the EEG as the last one to me. So I think it's like a transition from awake to maybe. But since majority rules, I would say awake.
Yeah, no, I mean, so I think what you're saying, right, it's a predominant posterior dominant rhythm or alpha rhythm that you're seeing pretty much throughout the end. Maybe at this very end, you're starting to get a little more theta activity starting to come out, right? You know, and so there's maybe a little slow eye rolling movement there at the end, at the very end that you're starting to see. You know, the EMG tone is, you know, down a little bit, but even that's not so important, quite frankly. But the fact that you're seeing that alpha rhythm go through all this is just quiet wakefulness. The patient probably has their eyes closed, right? Because that's what brings out that alpha rhythm so strongly here. They might be just having some elements of drowsiness there.
And now,
Yeah.
just, I brought up the fact that the waveform looks like sinusoidal. Is that not correct?
So I see this sort of bump. I think that's what you're saying.
Waxing and we,
Yeah. Because that's
Well, if the
what was
sinusoidal-
taught in the ASL, right?
yeah, sinusoid,
So
but
it's distributed on sinusoidal.
So you can see sort of that little bit of sort of back and
Yeah.
forth. You can, sometimes you do, it's not classic sinusoidal, I would say, but you may get that element of a macro change. And really all that's reflecting is a change in the frequency.
Yes.
Can you go back?
Yeah.
What's happening in the middle of that? Probably is on this road. That's all. Okay, so you have alpha suddenly shut off. That's when the eyes open.
Yeah.
Right, when the eyes close, they come up.
So those would be, like after this would be a good opportunity
Oh, there you
today,
go.
when you guys had like opening up a study, go into like a 5-second and pull out a ruler and just count. And then so you really know and convince yourself of what these different frequencies are like. And then zoom out and zoom back in, train your eyes to look at these.
You'll determine that. Theta.
All right.
Theta's close.
All right. Then,
There you go. Oh,
Here we go. So let's see, just looking at the eye reads, I'm still seeing look like the EKG. I don't really see real eye movement here. It's like, it does look like there's a transition halfway, so it looks like there's an outline. It looks like a transition.
so tell me when you see that transition. Tell me when to stop.
Stop. That's where it looks like it's transition. It looks like it switches into I would guess that's data. And it's also a change in the chin tone. About the exact same point. Probably extends a little bit farther than the basic transition. Except like the brain. So I would call this.
Yes. Am I agree with this?
Yeah, it's not good.
So, yeah, no, it's all right. I mean, so up to here, right? Again, take 30 seconds, you're gonna split into stages of C. So up to that part, you would call wait, right?
Yeah.
So this part you're saying is N1 sort of theta. This is very nice, classic. Sort of theta that you're seeing here. You know, but you know, and I'd say you're probably right, kind of going through. What what about here? What's that?
So like we said, like, the brain is dynamic, just because we're saying starting thing. And this is where I struggle, like, when I've been trying to practice.
Yeah.
But this
It's
is why
very-
we have
it's
to
very-
look and just say.
So that's why I did Dr. Dave's point to find unequivocal sleep and work your way backwards. So I mean, some people, this might look like alpha, so this part would maybe score maybe this weight. That part of the epoch, right? So the question really is, right, majority rules. So the question is, do you have at least 15 seconds of this stage, of this type of gene occurring here? So, there could be people who debate this a little bit here, but yeah, oops. Where are we here? But yeah, probably stage N1, but if we had an arm wrestle, probably over here, there's some purists that would start to say, maybe we're not quite at 15 seconds. Next. This is not. Okay.
Gotta make sure, yes.
Yeah, no, so this is. Can I go there? There it is. So there's that. There's this. All right. So that didn't work out so well. So, but yeah, you can sort of see the theta activity alpha that we were talking about there. One of the things just to sort of know, right? As I was saying, there are some people, about I think it was like 10–15% of people that don't have a good posterior dominant rhythm when they close their eyes. And so the rules for scoring N1 sleep are different in that case because you don't have your usual things to look at. So things you want to be looking for are the theta activity and their slowing of the EEG by at least 1 hertz from wake to sleep. So that's something you can look at. If you start to see vertex sharp waves, these are little pointy things that you'll see during transitional sleep. It almost looks like if you sat on it, it hurt you. So if you see those, they're very short, very fast. That's something you see in transitional
So you
sleep.
guys see that in adults as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So
Is
you'll
it
see
people like on certain medications or what? Or is it
vertex
just
sharp waves?
no, the no predominant posterior, like no.
Alpha, yeah, no, alpha should be standard in
Oh, okay,
absolutely.
okay.
That's a
I thought that was just a
normal,
kid thing. Okay.
yeah, normal.
So those sharp waves.
Yeah.
That we're seeing like repeating over and over again, that's not just like EEG intrusion.
That's right. It's not, it's not this EKG artifact that we're seeing. That's not a vertex sharp wave, but it's usually a positive deflection, very rapid. It's not, I don't think we have one here.
7 seconds on the top, Tracy.
This one here? That one.
That's what we're, okay.
It's not as sharp as you would want. That's where you're looking for, because it's outside of EKG. Okay.
Might have a little higher amplitude than a classic one, but yeah. And then the other thing, if you don't have that posterior dominant, look for slow eye rolling movements, and you can use the onset of those to start to stage N1 sleep. And those that don't have the alpha rhythm. So those are kind of 3 things you look for in the absence of alpha rhythm. Okay. All right. So these are, how do I get rid of this? All right, well, all right. So this is just staging N1 sleep. Some basic rules from the scoring manual. These are not all rules, but basically, once you see N1 sleep, you keep scoring it until there's evidence of another sleep stage that predominates on a particular epoch. Like we said, you want to look for that posterior dominant rhythm, and the attenuation of it is going to start to signal that we have N1 sleep. If it's not present, you look for these other hallmarks that we mentioned. And so if you happen to be in another stage of sleep, such as N2 sleep, you're gonna score subsequent segments after that arousal as N1 if there's this low amplitude mixed frequency EEG without a K complex or a spindle until there's evidence of another sleep stage. So those are some rules that are specific to stage N1 sleep technical scoring. Okay. And it just becomes more obvious when you start looking at these. If you were in REM sleep, let's say, right? You know, now what do I do after an arousal? You know, you would start to score the LAMP EEG in with SEMS stage N1 sleep. Okay, so if you see REM, you see an arousal, you see low mixed frequency, and you see slow rolling eye movements, you're going to start calling that stage N1 sleep. Okay? And you're going to call that even if the chin activity looks low and we think it might be REM sleep. And we continue that until we see other signs of a different sleep stage. All right. So unfortunately, I screwed up the things here. So I'll walk through this one a little bit here. So
Wait, that's a K complex?
no, that's a vertex. Too big, but yeah, right. So eyes, EEG, EMG, right? EMG tone relatively low compared to the other ones that we saw. And it gives somebody some money today. All right, you know, within the eyes, right? You maybe see some elements. Maybe there could be a little slow movement here, but not very classic for SEMS really here. But when you look at the EEG, right, you see these very nice signatures, right? You see this positive deflection. I don't give you a time guide here, but it's more than a half of a second. Not only is there a positive deflection, but there's a subsequent negative deflection. So you want to see that whole thing. That's what tells you it's a K complex, right? And so,
Negative.
what's that?
Negative.
Negative. Positive, yeah, negative voltage, positive voltage, yes. Yeah.
And as you go along, you can see when it goes down first, right there. Go down.
Yeah.
That's
So
not-
what would
that's
that
not- That's not a K complex.
What would that be? It's a slow wave, right? It's a build, right?
Pause.
Right, it's just as long, just as long as the game, right? It doesn't have that feature.
So K's always talking about negative.
Yeah,
That's
I
right.
mean, but look at that, look at that, look at that. And you'll see different, everyone will have a different, like, look at K complex, but they'll all sort of generally follow. So it's right.
Should go up first. And then
So how about the one prior to, at 1 second?
this one here,
Those, yeah.
yeah,
What's deflections first? Positive, goes down first.
Right, because even that, the one right before, because that's what I kind of look at them as experience side.
Like here, like they don't go together, they're like two different ones.
those are almost like, it's almost when you think about slow wave activity, you almost want to
Exactly.
have your zero line, right? These almost look like slow wave activity.
Right,
Whether
that's what I was
they're
thinking.
delta waves,
Uh-huh.
I can't tell you because I mean that's 75 microvolts.
Gotcha.
But you can still have slow wave activity, which is
Right.
less than 75.
Since it looks like the eye needs a big case, is that like muscle artifact?
Right here,
Yeah, the eyes, they're both together. Let's do these.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
So
Would that be like a-
why, you're asking is why is it reflected in the eyes, right?
No, why are they reflecting up together?
I was wondering if that would be considered just like muscular artifact, like things that you're just.
Which, he doesn't have what they're referenced. you have cortical leads are reference to here, and eyelids are either this way or that way. And your brain is attached to your eyes. So it gets reflected, and sometimes you have a hard time distinguishing whether or not the eyelids are the reflection of each you.
And some of it's right proximity, right, where your eyes are the sensors, where's the frontal electric pulse? How far is that from these, right? It's not that far, so you start, if I had sort of a full 10-20 system on, right, you would start to see the amplitude probably lower and lower, you know, at that moment in time, where you see that slowly. All right, so stage 2. So,
Because. Okay, now, good. We're just.
yeah,
you're
right,
just
no,
Turning the wheel. Right?
exactly. So that really is almost what you need to know about stage 2 sleep. Basically, this scoring manual said, if you see stage, if you see K complex, you see spindles, it's stage 2 sleep. Bam, bam, period, the end. Now, from the way sleep works, we often know in the first REM period of sleep, we can see spindles. It's that sleep is dynamic, right? It's not one hypothesis, right? So we can see elements of those sleep states. So particularly in the first REM period, we will see some spindles. But for the sake of agreement between the scorers, we say when we see that spindle or K complex, we're going to start calling.
So even if it's only, if it's less than. So what if the majority of that rock is brown, and then the spindle in the beginning or the end or something like that, you're still gonna call it into?
The way the scoring manual is written,
Says. Okay.
you wait till after, let that hypothesis go down.
And then that's where.
We'll get to REM.
But
yeah,
you will
eventually.
see, you will see that. So
Yeah.
probably you saw
It's
it.
been a struggle.
It is. So basic scoring at stage 2. N2 should be scored in the absence of any N3 criteria. Greater than 20% slow wave activity. If either a K complex without an arousal, i.e. K complex without alpha, or a spindle occurs in the first part of the epoch or last half of the prior epoch. So I don't know if I have the example, unfortunately, to show you, but let's just say I'm on an epoch and the K complex is at the very end of that epoch. As soon as I move over to the next epoch, because the K complex is on the last page, I start scoring the next page of stage 2 is what that's saying. Okay. Even though I may not see any K complex or spindle on that next page, because I just saw it on the page before, my clock counter starts then, basically. Okay. So you're going to continue scoring stage N2, even if you don't see a K complex or spindle. So it can just be pages and pages of nothing, you know, until you see signs of another sleep stage or you see an arousal for a slump. When an arousal is present, you call it into up to that point of the arousal. And epochs after stage N3 that do not meet criteria for N3 would then start to call that N2. So it gets confusing, right? That 20% threshold, you could have slow wave and still be N2. But that's what you have to sort of keep an eye out for. When do we end N2? So we end N2 when you see a frank transition to wakefulness, when you have an arousal followed by low amplitude mixed frequency, and it doesn't meet stage R sleep, there's a transition at N3 or REM sleep, or there's a major body movement that's followed by slow movements. All right, this should be easy. So yeah, what you see kind of with these black bars are really sort of that slow wave activity, take my word, it's more than 75 microvolts in this case. Don't have a ruler there for you, but it's more than 20%. With my eyes, I can tell that, it's probably more like 60–70%, if not a little bit more than that. EMG tones relatively low. You can see a little bit reflected in the eyes there.
Yeah.
This would be old stage 4 sleep in the Rexhaft and Kale's manual. We don't call it that in the new ASM manual, we just call it stage 1. So a lot of it was done more just to help with the movement between scores.
Was there any evidence to suggest
Right. That differentiating makes a difference. Yeah. This is just a page out of the manual, just that emphasis point that right. This is stage N3, and then we see the slow wave activity, and suddenly there's no slow wave activity here. So this would end up being scored as stage 2. So there's no arousal, no nothing. So that's what we convert to stage 2 is the default. All right. What's this? Rick.
So in the eye movement, there's out of phase reflections, sharp and high amplitudes, suggestive of rapid eye movements. Looking at the G. Looks like low amplitude mixed frequency to me. And then the chin tone comparison by the size is pretty low. So I'll call this perhaps a stage.
Vermont, Sam, agree? Okay. Yeah, well, I think that's right. Right, you've got the low EMG tone, but you have the rapid eye movements. You see sort of that sort of classic low amplitude mixed frequency. Are there other signatures you might look for in the EEG?
Sawtooth.
Yeah, so sawtooth. Not classic here for me in terms of classic sawtooth thing that you'll see here, but there are epochs where you might, I don't forget if I have an example in a minute that might show that. Kingman, do you think? I don't see sawtooth. Yeah. There's my example. Yeah. So here, this is probably the most confusing one, right? Low EMG tone. I don't see any K complexes. I don't see really any clear spindles. I do see some high frequency activity over here. It's pretty fast. But oops, I do see that. But that's what sawtooth is talking about. So that's something you kind of find behind that signature, because that's going to help you sort of convince yourself that you're still right. Because otherwise you'd be saying, this could be right, or we don't, So in a sense, the other thing I'll sort of say, when we talk about REM, we don't talk about it in the scoring manual, but these eye movements that you're seeing is what we would sort of call sort of basic eye movements or basic REM. And then there's the concept of tonic REM. And so that's when you sort of see periods where there's lack of eye movements or something like this with tonic REM.
There's a fragment that's running around. I would go pretty common here.
Yep.
It's not simple. So it's pretty far away. in some ways, but
Yeah.
History. But no clinical.
So let me finish off this little part here on REM, and probably call it time. So REM rules are long and they're sort of sit and read it and internalize it. So
25
we're gonna
seconds, it's like
go-
20 seconds, but
yeah, exactly. Oh boy, what did I do there?
People are working against you.
There we go. So we score a stage REM if there's lamp activity, no K or spindles. The EMG tone is the lowest of the night. And there is REM at any position in the epoch, beginning of the epoch, end of the epoch, at epoch. That's the exception to the majority of rules. This is the one exception.
But it says the K in the middle of it.
So that K wins.
There,
That K wins.
that's what I
the-
need to know.
that's- The K wins.
It's okay.
As long as it doesn't have an arousal after the shade.
All right.
But if there's no K, no spindle, even if the REM eye movement is at the end of the epoch, and the rest of that epoch looks like stage 2, we will probably, because that rapid eye movement won't be bad. So there is what's called the back scoring. So once you sort of find what you call sort of unequivocal REM, we're kind of go backwards. So we can continue to score REM going backwards. You know, when rapid eye movements are absent, right? If there's lamp without the K or spindles, there's low chin EMG, no arousals, and SEMS following arousal are absent. What's the reasoning behind this rule? Really, what this is really trying to get to is you can see rapid eye movements, and that anchors us, that REM is starting. But in fact, what often precedes the rapid eye movements is that chin EMG tone has already started to come down. And so what this rule really allows us to do is to score REM backwards to the point of that reduction in EMG tone reduction, assuming that there's an absence of K, spindles, arousals, etc. Yeah, this is, yeah, there could be fist fights.
base question.
If a majority of the epoch contains segments scored as REM, REM wins. So this is REM wins in this fight. REM wins, yeah.
Even if it's okay.
No, with the K, where you sit there, but that's what, and that's, you will have sessions in the national meeting about this. And this will be
It's those that want to make everybody agree versus those that want to respect the physiology.
remember, these are all cortical needs, they all get very deep in the brain. Tell you everything in the brain, doing these things. Asynchronous fashion, not necessarily completely. So and this is a clue though to me, when I started seeing these N2s that pop up in the middle of the print. They call them piano keys, that's what Carol used to call them, piano. So you see the black route, and it's interrupted by N1, N1, N1. You'll see it on explorers with a really tight sphincter. That's interrupted sleep, that's interrupted REM. There is maybe some clinical significance for people that have things like post-traumatic stress disorder. Other things in which they have disorders of arousal and that's well.
The problem with the academy rules is that it prevents you from getting that the spin wave.
No, it's a lot better than the 3 minute.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that is.
The rule, we just use your iron and say this is all around.
Yeah.
No.
So this is starting REM. We continue scoring REM in the absence of Ks or spindles. Low chin EMG persists and there's no arousal. So the REM. So how do we end REM? So end of REM is when we see a transition to wake or stage 3 sleep. There's an increase in EMG tone. There's an arousal followed by lamps or sounds. There's measured body movements or K complexes without arousals or spindles start to. Look at, you know. All right. So I think this sort of speaks to that uncomfortable feeling in the first REM cycle where you have elements of both stage 2 and REM. And so segments between Ks and spindles are stage N2 for that part of the epoch. Okay? Segments with REM without Ks or spindles and low chin tone are stage R. And if majority of epoch is N2, then score is N2, majority is stage R, then score is stage R. So partition that.
Two versus constant that.
I'll stop there just because of time. I've got arousals, respiratory. We're gonna do another time.
Well, I think this is good to start, have these kind of